another episode of the Take Control of Your Life podcast. This week we're going to talk about progressions and why it's important to follow the progressions. Number one, when you're trying to improve your skill, but also when we're doing them in class. So I've been doing CrossFit. I started out in my garage in 2016. Started out in my garage in 2016, so we're looking at 7 years. And I was that guy who just wanted to jump in, just do the workout, and skip all the progression pieces. But they are there for a reason. So I got Greg with me. Greg's a master's athlete, and he's getting ready for his double knee replacements. So right now there's some things that we have to modify. And there are reasons that we have these progressions. So if we're looking at the push, let's say push press. Let's use push press because it's a dynamic movement, but it's not complicated. You have that dip and drive. And what people don't realize is they're trying to go heavy, and then you can see their spine is starting to move or their hips are pushing forward. They're missing out on those smaller stability muscles. And so the reason that we do these progressions, the first piece is in class, because we do them every single class. Mm-hmm. The reason we're doing the progressions as the warm-up is we're firing those smaller muscles to be primed for you to lift heavier. Number two is we can see, because we're using a barbell and then we do build-up rounds, we can see where you're at in weight, and we can adjust your position. So I like the push press piece because if someone's erector muscles, the muscles that hold our spine in place, are not strong enough, their posture is going to change. And so their spine position is going to change, and it's probably not going to affect you today or tomorrow if it happens, but over the course of time, you can start compressing those discs, and you can end up with a bulged disc or worse, a herniated disc. And so that's spine placement. Now, the other one I want to talk about is like a handstand push-up. Handstand push-up, you need to be able to support your entire body weight in that handstand position. And the reason that progressions would be good for that, and if we look at our progressions real quick, the ones that I try to follow is you have your handstand push-up, your handstand hold, your pike hold, your plank hold, and then you would do a plank from the knees. All of those are really important. You need to be able to hold yourself for a certain amount of time in each position. I would like 20 to 30 seconds at least before you move on to the next piece of the progression. And so why are we looking at that? Well, if you're an athlete who cannot hold that plank from the knees for 30 seconds, the stability muscles in your shoulders are not primed and not strong enough to support you in that handstand. And if they're not strong enough to support you in that handstand, that's when we see things like torn rotator cuffs, torn labrums, torn biceps, and we I want to avoid long layoffs. So let's say it takes you 6 months to build up the stability in your shoulders to where you can perform a handstand. That sounds way better than today coming in, kicking up on the wall, tearing your rotator cuff, and then you're out for 18 months. Mm-hmm. Follow the progressions because they're there to make you better. And I am telling you from experience, I am that kid who I came in day one and was like, well, I want to do a muscle up when I could barely do a pull up. And I messed up my shoulders. Don't be that guy. It's better to go through the progressions, take an extra month or 2 or 6 months or even a year, and have the stability in your joints to perform these movements correctly. And then you also have the actual positions down. We talk about the neurological pathways, the building of the neurological pathways in your brain to actually perform skills. We do those through the progressions, and that's also really important. So I'm watching Gentry get stuff out of the room. Those are my 2 reasons for following the progressions. 1, it's going to make you better. It's going to make your stability muscles better. And then 2, you're going to understand the movements better under lighter loads, which will in turn pay off when you go to do the more difficult or the more complex movement. So what would you like to speak on when it comes to progressions?
First of all, I think for a beginner athlete, it is essential that you follow the progressions. And I've been very active, even when I was heavier. I've been very active my whole life. But when I came in here and started doing CrossFit for the first time, you think you know how to grab the bar and throw it up over your head. Well, there's a technique to it, and there's a technique for a reason. And I actually work with Devin on personal training, and we do a lot of technique stuff and a lot of stretching and stuff. But I think, especially as that new athlete, when we're doing the warm-ups, focus on your technique. That is the time to dial it in. And if you're unable to put weight on the bar, you're unable to. And that's just the reality. But the more comfortable you get with the proper technique, the easier the lift is going to be, and your fundamentals are there. So your risk of injury goes down dramatically at that point.
What do you think is the most difficult movement that you have learned? I think so. Weightlifting is a little bit different because almost everyone can move a PVC pipe. Apart from, we have some athletes who have had replacements, and that's something, or arthritis, so they don't have the range of motion. But almost everyone can move a PVC pipe in some range of motion of that movement.
Mm-hmm.
But when we get into gymnastics, that's where it becomes difficult. We have some athletes, like, you have to be able to hang and support your own body weight before you could think about doing a pull-up.
Mm-hmm.
And those things can be difficult. Personally, for me, I think the hardest movement, the most complicated movement I've learned is the ring muscle up. And I am still to this day struggling with some of the pieces of being able to string two together. I can jump up there and I can do one, but being able to do two together, the way you come down and you get into your next kip, it's so complicated on those rings because they are two dynamic objects.
Mm-hmm.
If you have a bar, it's a static object and it's pinned in space. With the rings, if you do not have the stability in your shoulders and you jump up there, and all it takes is one rep of pushing the rings away from your body, you could tear a rotator cuff, you could tear a labrum, which is why you guys will see when I do classes, I will do the low ring transitions, or I've tried to switch over to doing those the high rings, but I do the jumping transitions where I hang out in the dip for 2 seconds. I'm only 31, but when I was younger, I always wanted to skip those pieces and just go straight to the movement. But now, I truly enjoy the isometric and the eccentric pieces of our progressions, because isometric, you're building up the ability to support yourself in these positions, and eccentric, you're building up the ability to put yourself in these positions. And we have a whole podcast on that specific triangle of understanding how to manage positions. But what do you think is one of the more difficult movements that people learn in here that might take maybe years to develop the actual RX movement?
I think it's the overhead squat.
That's a good one. That's a very good one.
Yeah, I think that one is very difficult. I mean, like you said, with a PVC pipe, I can actually, get down a little bit, but when you throw that bar overhead, and trust me, it's an empty bar, and it's that shoulder placement, and obviously I have a bad lower body, so it's for me getting that depth and everything. But if you do not follow the progressions, you are going to end up bringing that bar forward. If you have weight on it, you're going with it if you don't let go, or you're not going to hinge at the right place. You're not going to send those hips back and get into that full squat. You're not going to get the depth. So, yeah, that's one that I think is really difficult.
That's a very interesting one, because the progression for that is usually just slowing the athlete down and slightly reducing the range of motion, which eccentric pieces of this stuff is so important. So if you have that PVC pipe, and what Greg's talking about is the difference in, if you have that bar overhead, the difference in if it's 2 inches forward, it's going to make the difference, because that object is the farthest away from your center of mass that you can reach.
Mm-hmm.
And so if I'm 2 inches in front of me as I go to squat and it's in front of my toes, it's going to want to pull me forward, and then my shoulders are fighting for it, and your whole body's going to be fighting for this object. And so oftentimes the way that we approach it is, rather than letting people just drop into the bottom of squat and then you see that whole hips go forward and they're trying to push the shoulders forward to catch the bar, we slow them down. And I'll have you guys do 10-second squats when it comes to overhead squats. And what I can see is, I start squatting, I see that bar go forward, pause, correct, squat, pause, knees out, correct, pause. And honestly, to me, that's what really sets our coaching apart, is the ability to see those kind of things and even teach in that manner. But the progression doesn't have to be moving from one movement to the next piece of the movement. It can be slowing down the movement, or reducing the range of motion until you understand it at that range of motion. There's another movement that I do that all the time with you guys, where I'm like, reduce the range of motion until you understand at that point, and then go. And I can't think of what it is right now, but I think that was a great example of one of the more difficult ones when it comes to weightlifting.
And the bottom line is, you can't go from A to Z without going through B, C, D, E, F, G. I mean, all the other letters. So slowing it down is definitely one of those things. I mean, when I attempt to do an overhead squat in general, I have to go slow just because of the knees, Achilles, and all that stuff. But slowing it down does help. And I totally agree with you that the more time, and I don't think we do enough of this in CrossFit in general, is time under tension. It's forcing those muscles to stabilize.
I bet we do it more than
Oh,
you guys have probably dropped in the 10 gyms at this point, you and Deborah.
Oh yeah.
I bet we do more time under tension than any other place. And I'm not talking about programmed time under tension. I'm talking about when I personally run warm-ups, and I know that the other coaches do this too, I will say, hey, 2 seconds in the bottom of that squat, or hey, let's hang out here for 30 seconds, because I'm fully aware of that's what's going to pay off in the long run for most of these athletes.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if Matt Fraser walks in, does he need to go through all these progressions? Maybe not, but honestly, I bet he does, because that's his background.
Yeah,
that's what I read his book, and he does. When his warm-ups, he goes through the hollow rocks and the arches and the kip swings, and then he does all of those things, and that's why he is at the top of his sport. So follow the progressions. The other thing I do want to say is, as coaches, we are here to help you. So if we feel like where you're at isn't the best for you, we're going to help you out as well. So don't be upset if a coach either wants to, one, push you to the next progression, or two, pull you back so you can get better at the previous progression. Both of those are very, very important.